Welcome.
Hey guys, what's going on? Chris here with Shuckhead Gaming, and here's my review for Resident Evil 4 VR, releasing exclusively for Quest 2 headsets. Resident Evil 4 came out in 2005, and with it forever changed the franchise, taking its survival horror roots and injecting it with a strong focus on gunplay and toning down the horror aspects. Resident Evil 4 is one of my favorite games of all time, and actually one of the only titles I've ever gone back to play multiple times. So does this VR adaptation successfully make the jump to VR? Or is it even better? Stick around and I'll tell you. As always guys, if you like this video, please hit that like button, leave a comment, and hopefully by the end of this video, I will have earned your subscription. And yeah, don't forget to hit that bell icon. First off, know that this is not a remaster of Resident Evil 4. As such, this game uses much of the same textures from the HD version that came out on the PS4 back in 2011. I say much of the time, as it does appear that some extra work has been done here and there to help the game hold up to the high-resolution Quest display, and the fact that you can literally put your face right up to the textures to scrutinize. And while the game certainly shows its age at times by using some rather flat and dated texture work and wooden character animations, the game as a whole is actually incredible looking when seen in a headset. Now, I'm not particularly into the whole retro game thing, as I feel that all too often games I loved when I was younger simply don't hold up and instead sour the fond memories I had of playing those games back in the day. However, when I first entered the dreary forests of Res 4's early village area, it looked and felt exactly like what I imagined this classic game would look like if I could stand inside it. And like I said, I think this is due largely in part to some improved texture work here and there to take what we remembered of the flat version and ensure it holds up in VR. Now, you're not going to see any incredible lighting or particle effects here, as this is originally a game from the PS2 era, but outside of the flat and lower resolution cutscenes, it looks great on the Quest 2, coming off super sharp and actually standing as one of the better looking games currently on the headset, and one which I rarely found myself wishing I could play on PC instead. Though even with the decision to have Res 4 running only on the Quest 2, the Quest's dreaded foveated rendering can be seen utilized, albeit to various degrees, with the size of the screen dropping in resolution, with brighter outdoor environments being more noticeable but faring better when inside buildings. This along with some slight texture detail drop off when looking further ahead, and it would appear Oculus made the right choice going with just the Quest 2 here, as it certainly is working for these visuals. However, you can pretty much ignore these criticisms, for they rarely impact the impressiveness of the visuals. Further improvements can be seen when looking at the game's weapons, as for obvious reasons they've been remodeled for VR, for which, similarly to your in-game hands, look good, but also not so good that they feel like they don't belong in the game. And while some may be disappointed that the VR version didn't get a visual overhaul, there's something to be said for the decision to ensure that the VR version of Resident Evil 4 feels faithful to the original experience. Well, as faithful as it can, for I simply cannot stress enough how downright awesome some of these set pieces look and feel in VR, feeling familiar and yet totally new at the same time. Sound is up next.
Mr. Kennedy. Still alive, I see. So, do you like my garden?
I see you've managed to work in a little of your twisted taste here, too.
Staying even more faithful to the original game than the visuals did, Resident Evil 4 VR sounds just like the original game. Though, that's not always a good thing. I love the original music in Resident Evil 4 as it feels so Resident Evil 4, and it feels right at home here in the new VR sound mix. The same can be said about the weapon sound effects that sound to my ears to be the same ones used in the OG game. Then they actually hold up pretty well here, maybe lacking some of the punch or detail of some newer titles, but still sounding realistic and powerful. Sticking with the good, I was actually impressed with the use of 3D audio here as well in the new sound mix, something that would have obviously not been in the original version of the game, but makes a huge difference when in combat and trying to keep track of multiple targets without the benefit of the original's third-person camera field of view. Unfortunately, a new sound mix using old audio assets is prone to highlight some of the original game's dated audio design, including repetitive enemy hit groans, sharp music or sound effect drop-offs, and some overly silent parts of the game that can at times sound like the game is muted besides the sound of your footsteps, which also sound a bit canned here. Now, of course, one can make a great argument for the authenticity of it all, and for good reason, but unlike the visuals, much of the original's sound design just doesn't hold up as well, especially when under the scrutiny of headphones. Though, speaking of authenticity, that voice acting, well, it's dubbed Japanese to English, and if you've ever played an older Resident Evil, Metal Gear Solid, or Final Fantasy title, just to name a few, then you know what to expect. The original was wonderfully cheesy, and this is no different. Well, that is besides some of the more risque dialogue parts that were removed for this version, which I'm not in support of, but that's a conversation for a later Virtual Boys episode. However, regardless of my criticisms of the dated sound design, it was a joy to hear the familiar chimes entering into my inventory menu or the greeting of the vendor. Resident Evil 4 VR doesn't always sound perfect, but it is most definitely Resident Evil 4. And that brings us to gameplay. Resident Evil 4 for me is one of the best games ever made, and much of this is due to its perfect blend of pacing, gunplay, gothic horror, puzzle solving, treasure hunting, and inventory management. So much so that it was no surprise that Capcom would attempt to take much of what worked in Resident Evil 4 and reimagine it in the most recent Resident Evil 8 Village. So when it was announced that Resident Evil 4 was getting the VR treatment, I almost pissed myself in excitement, though not without some trepidation that the move to VR would wreck the perfect gameplay balance that the first had struck. Now, for those who haven't yet experienced Resident Evil 4, just know the horror and puzzle solving aspects are really just window dressing here, as this is first and foremost a shooter. So unlike Resident Evil 7 VR, you likely will not need a pair of spare underwear to play this game. Right off the hop, let me tell you, when you first start the game, it will ask you if you want to play it on easy or normal, with a harder difficulty that unlocks upon completion of the campaign. I highly recommend you choose normal, then turn off that default laser sight. I say this because this really is the exact same game as the original and not adjusted in the least for the added advantages of being in VR. Most notably, the original game required you to plant your feet before shooting, meaning you were always stationary when in combat. Well, here in VR, you can literally run circles around the enemies, reloading and shooting as you go, giving you a huge advantage. This, in addition to the fact that aiming and shooting is much faster here, with the added benefits of being able to shoot around corners and straight down at enemies below you. Needless to say, headshots are much easier to rack up, and as a result, ammo scarcity is much less an issue here, and risks breaking the precious inventory management balance that the original had. And frankly, it does if you keep the default laser sight on, an attachment that was in the original something you could purchase later on in the game. Now, that being said, I'm not saying this was a breeze to run through, as the game's more intense sections certainly made me work for it, but I rarely found myself treating each bullet as a precious commodity, like I did with the original version. As such, I do wish developer Armature Studios had made some adjustments to ammo quantity in order to better balance the game for VR, or at least gave players access to the harder difficulty right at the start. However, besides that, I loved playing this game in VR, and I think Armature picked a perfect balance of VR immersion and accessibility, while still retaining some of the clunky menu and UI aspects that were so key to the game's very intentional pacing. Newcomers to this game are sure to find the need to go into the inventory menu to switch out their primary weapons, get an ammo count, or view the in-game map, a little bit clunky and slow, but fans will love this intentional approach to the game's pacing and how it affects gameplay. But while the game keeps some things the same, it also very much embraces the fact that it is now in VR, and despite a few minor issues, feels like Armature gave a lot of thought and care into the implementation of VR mechanics. Health is tracked via a watch on your wrist, weapon selection can be done via a weapon wheel, but why? Fortunately though, the default setting follows more familiar VR mechanics, putting your pistol on your waist, your primary two-handed weapon on your back, a grenade on your right chest, and your knife on your left. Additionally, you can access your desired choice of healing substance on your left shoulder, with access to your additional inventory simply a button press away. So yeah, basically what Resident Evil 7 should have been. Reloads are done manually but are simplified here slightly by automatically ejecting the used clip when you go to grab a new one, which is always on your left waist, and utilizes a game mechanic I haven't seen before, as the left and right hip holsters slightly slide back and forth, tracking your hand movements, making grabbing things right below your hands regardless of how you might be turned. Truthfully, I'm not sure how I feel about this, but it's certainly made for easier seated play, as you aren't fumbling around to grab something from your actual waist. Outside of this though, guns feel great and gunplay was fun, with just enough challenge in the aiming to feel like a badass without the sense of kid gloves. Basically, you can miss and you'll need to time your headshots, but you won't be wasting a clip trying to do it either. But it's the little things that Armature has done to make sure this version of Resident Evil 4 doesn't feel clunky because it's in VR. Any holstered item you grab automatically goes back when you drop it. Similarly, any item you need to pick up magnetically grapples to your hand and when released goes right into your inventory. Add in other aspects like puzzles you physically interact with, cupboards you can open and doors that can be opened by hand, and this game truly feels like a game made for VR and not just some quick port. And with the basic mechanics made easy, we are left with a 15 to 20 hour campaign that is as simple and addictive to play as it was 15 years ago. In fact, that's a lie. It's better, as it is a VR port that sacrifices almost nothing in its transition to VR, but gains so much in both immersion and fun factor, as tearing apart zombies shotgun literally in hand is just brilliant. However, there are a few less than ideal aspects, such as the inability to two-hand pistols or the way the sniper scope is handled. The largest issue is how the game handles many of your character's more physical movements by quickly pulling out to a third-person view. A choice probably made to avoid VR sickness issues here, but unfortunately ends up being really jarring and immersion breaking. I mean, seriously, any window I jumped out of, any building I hopped off of, resulted in a change of perspective. Kicking an enemy or a door, yep, perspective switch. And it gets old really quick. And in a game filled with great VR decisions, this is just a bad one. It's not game breaking, but it sucks. Similarly, the 2D cutscenes are not only lower quality than the rest of the game, but have a bad habit of interrupting the flow of gameplay. Now, yes, these parts of the original game are a necessary evil unless you're going to remake the entire game, but like the irritating companion sections of the game, these are often just small gripes when looking at the game as a whole. Resident Evil 4 VR requires the use of 2 motion controllers and can be easily played seated or standing with a moderate amount of room recommended. As for comfort options, there are blinders, click turning, and even the ability to teleport as opposed to full locomotion, though doing so really can ruin the flow of the combat. And finally, that brings me to fun factor and my final review. Resident Evil 4 is one of my favorite games of all time, and I'm thrilled to say it's now also one of my favorite VR games of all time. In my prior review for Lone Echo 2, I had stated my concern for the quality of Oculus published titles that we had for the Quest when compared to the previous output on PC. I'm still hoping to see some new groundbreaking IPs down the road, but Resident Evil 4 VR certainly is a flag in the ground for Oculus, as it's probably the first real Quest exclusive that would make me buy a Quest 2. You know, if I wasn't already obsessed with VR. As you guys know, I hate numbered review scores and instead rate games on a basis of buy it, burn it, or wait on it. Yeah, so not surprising to anyone who has watched this review up to this point, this is an absolute buy for me, and I'd even go as far to say that this is mandatory VR if you own a Quest 2, and a very compelling reason to consider getting one if you don't. Of course, this may not be for everyone as this is very shooter focused, but if you're a bit of a scaredy pants, I would say give this one a try as you might find it to not be that scary. Now, if you excuse me, I'm off to play this game again on hard.
Come back anytime.